Hello, everyone. This is Chala Dinkoy, CEO and founder of The Repositioning Expert, coming to you with another edition of the Naked Marketing Podcast, where we talk about honest and authentic mistakes that business owners make in their marketing. I have here the wonderful, my new guest, Beverly Behan. Welcome, Beverly.
Hi, Chala. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I got to tell you, I love that blonde on black. It's a very striking background, and it's not even a background. It's real, isn't it?
It's real. It's an antique cabinet from the 19th century, actually.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So tell us what you do and who you help.
Sure. So my clients are primarily boards of directors, mostly S&P 1500 companies. And typically I help them to be the very best they can be, to be a true asset to the company they govern. And so my client is typically either the chair of the board or the chair of the nominating and governance committee. A lot of my work involves board evaluations and director evaluations, but not using some form or scorecard, because in my experience, that doesn't work very well. It involves interviews with the board, with the senior management team, and really drawing out where is the board adding value for this company and for the stakeholders of the company, and where are opportunities for continuous improvement to make the board even better. So that's the work I've done for 25 years. Actually started as a partner with Mercer Consulting and Mercer Delta in New York, first in Toronto, and then was with the Hay Group for a couple of years, was the global managing director of board effectiveness, and then went on my own in about 11 years ago. So
I got to tell you, I interview a lot of people, but this is very niched. And you know that I'm a niche.
It's very niche. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So you fell into this niche because that was your bread and butter when you first started your work?
No. I was a lawyer, and I was an impressionable young attorney working at a large Canadian airline. And I saw a marquee name board. Okay. One guy ended up on the Supreme Court of Canada, absolutely marquee name board. Okay. And they were like a country club, and they made terrible decisions. We can talk at length about what happened there. One of the things I was involved in was a deal. This was after the first Gulf War. And so if you were an airline, fuel prices were through the roof and nobody was flying because they were afraid to fly. And you couldn't pack it in because you lost all your landing slots. And unlike our American counterparts, we couldn't file for Chapter 11. Once we filed for Canadian CCAA, they would seize our jets at Narita and wherever else. So we did a wages for stock deal with our unions. And I was involved in negotiating that with all 5 unions, where people gave up money to put into stock of the company. Then they became shareholders and they got a little more interested in the board. Now, everybody was supposed to participate. And the guy who was the CEO at the time said he was giving 20% of his pay, which was also, I think, what the pilots were doing, and the rest of the management team, to the stock program. It was then revealed some months later, when the company's proxy circular came out, that the board had given him a raise of, I think, about 18%. So everybody else took a solid 20, but this guy took about, 2. We had wildcat strike at the Toronto airport, I think the Vancouver airport. And see, people were really interested because they were actually shareholders now. Yeah. And the board ended up sending a letter to the homes of the employees telling them, stop criticizing the CEO and be glad you have a job. Well, you can imagine the impact of that on morale of the company. They then realized the CEO had become a bit of a lightning rod for employee discontent. They had to get rid of him. And this is an airline, okay? It's a global airline. And they hired a guy who had run a commercial real estate company. And he happened to be in the same office tower in Calgary, Alberta as the airline. So these jokes were sort of circulating. Well, our board must have met this guy in the elevator, in the lobby, because all of a sudden he became, now needless to say, the morale of the place, the whole thing, this guy didn't know how to run an airline. And so that company no longer exists. So we raised $750 million to try to save the company. We did a deal with AMR. We were on track. And these decisions essentially by the board means that that company no longer exists. 40,000 of my friends lost their jobs, and I got real interested in boards. I had gone back into private practice at a law firm in Vancouver at the time, and a report came out, and it was called Where Were the Directors? And it was a scathing rebuke of the state of corporate governance in Canada. But I will tell you, my friend, it was absolutely no different in the United States. That's the reason we had Enron. And I read it on English Bay Beach like it was a dirty novel. And all my friends are like, what are you reading? I'm like, I'm reading this corporate governance thing. They're like, girl, you got to get a life. I said, I think I got a life. This is what I want to do.
Wow.
To me, the board is a place where you have smart, experienced, capable people that ask the right questions. And it's where the buck stops and they step up. And in those days, boards were nothing but a country club. And that's what I wanted to do. And that's what I've had the privilege of doing for 25 years.
Oh my God, your life reads like a novel. Well, that's why you're right. My God, it's like a movie. So I'm just so curious. Do you market like regular businesses, or is it all word of mouth at this level?
It's largely word of mouth at this level. And there are pros and cons of that. What I have found as useful marketing, however, are writing books. I like to write. I wrote my first book, and I think, which was a business book about changing careers, actually. I wrote it in 98. And then I've written a number, and I have a number of new books actually just coming out. I used the COVID lockdowns to write 3 new books.
Good for you.
But what I find is people read them and they feel like they've spent time with you, and they want to talk to you because they like the way you think. And so for me, that's been a really good marketing tool.
That's great. Now, do you do anything with the book, or people just by osmosis pick it up, or do you target people with it and send it to them? And, you know,
sort of all of the above. I mean, you want to get the book as a vehicle to do some talks, do some webcasts, do some podcasts. You want to use the book, you know, as a sponsored ad on Amazon, things like that. I will send it out to people. For example, the new book, if I might, this is the
please show me.
It's actually out today.
Wow, I love it.
Becoming a Boardroom Star. And what's unique about this book is that a lot of my books are really aimed at sort of the S&P 1500. This is a book that's been derived from interviews I've done with thousands of board members over 25 years. They really talk about what makes somebody a truly outstanding director and what detracts from, you know, the esteem they would otherwise be held in, and things that really are pitfalls. But it applies whether you're in the Fortune 500 or whether you're on the board of a local hospital or a local charity or a college. Because it goes, and it also, it's interesting. I sent the manuscripts because I've had the privilege of working all over the world. So I sent the manuscripts to some people in Southeast Asia, some people in the Middle East, some people in Latin America. And they said, oh, I've seen exactly this. So these are global. These go from, this is typical board issues, and there are ways of someone on any board. So this is an unusual piece, because a lot of my books are more, you know, about board building per se. So this is for individual directors.
I'm fascinated as a marketer by your targeting, because one, it's got to be very different based on industry, and it's got to be very different based on size. So
there's no difference based on industry.
Okay.
Okay. So you can be in the boardroom of, I don't know, you can be in the boardroom of US Steel, and it's exactly the same as being in the boardroom of a big telecom. Okay. If you're in a Fortune 500, the difference is it's very different to be on the board of, you know, be in the boardroom of something like Verizon. Okay. And then go to a small telecom that's almost like a startup or something like that. The differences really come in the maturity of the company. So I do actually a fair amount of work with biotechs outside of Boston, okay, and that sort of corridor in Cambridge. And those boards engage very differently than my clients at the larger companies in Fortune 500. So those are really how they segment, as opposed to an industry segmentation. The challenge is that my client is nearly always the chair of the board or the chair of the nominating governance committee, and sometimes the chief executive officer. And it's difficult often to connect directly. Those people have a lot of administrative assistants and other people sort of guarding them. So that's one of the biggest challenges, is to connect with them. That's why referrals and word of mouth is so important in my business.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's not the kind of cold outreach that you can do at all. And I also imagine that nonprofit is different as well.
I don't do a lot of work in the nonprofit sector. I mean, what's sort of interesting about Word and Star is that it's one of the only books I've written that I think has a nonprofit application. Most of my work is in the S&P 1500. So that's different.
So what is the number one bleeding pain? Because, I'm a pain researcher, because that's what marketing is. If there's no pain, there's no sale, sadly. Most people buy based on pain. What is that most expensive problem that it's triggering them to call someone like you?
Very often, and I have a third book that's going to come out. It's the last of the three. Very often there's a new CEO and they are having some challenges working with the board. When you think about it, a CEO, when you become appointed as a CEO of a public company, and even if you're an executive director of a nonprofit, okay, this is the first time that you often haven't reported up to one person, a boss. You're going to report to a group, the board of directors.
Yeah.
That's a very different dynamic. And very often, new CEOs will naturally, build a great relationship with their chair, which they should, but it can't be an exclusive relationship. And so they treat the chair like their boss, but they don't realize that, well, no, there's the chair of the audit committee and there's the other people on the board and there's all that. And very often there are issues there. Often also the CEO realizes that the board really isn't adding that much value for the organization. There's people that have been on that board a long time. They really are not contemporary with business issues, or they really don't have the right background and never did in the first place. And they want more value from the board, but they're afraid to try to make those changes because they fear they're going to alienate the board, and they as the CEO are going to risk their political capital by doing that. So it can be very useful for them to bring in somebody like me. I'm technically hired by the board. And, and the work that I do brings the issues up and actually gets the board to buy in around these issues. And that's what causes change. But that's a pain point for a lot of CEOs, is that they're either struggling to work with their board because they haven't done that before, or they know their board is really not as value adding as they want.
So from an outreach perspective, my marketer's mind can't stop working, but I would imagine that you're keeping a very close eye on new appointments.
Yes. In fact, my plan for the new CEO's book and why it's coming out last is that this week, I hope to press the button on some advanced reader copies, which we're going to do as paperbacks. So they're kind of pricey. But one thing I discovered is that in the United States, they have a media rate, and you can ship a book, as long as it's not super heavy, for about $5. So you print the book, it costs about $15. You mail it for another $5, for $20, and you're specifically targeting it to a new CEO, because there's a list that comes out every couple of weeks, and there may only be one or two. But I think this is my new strategy to go specifically.
Very targeted. I love it. I love it. Yeah. I have so much more ideas, but we're going to talk. So let's get to the naked marketing mistake. Let's get to, what was that big expensive mistake that you made in your marketing?
Well, it's quite recent, actually. So in the course of doing these books, I took the new CEO's book, and I was actually invited to be a keynote speaker at what was supposed to be this big global webcast. And I thought, wow, what a great opportunity. And I spent a lot of time and a lot of money repositioning that book to another C-suite role. I won't say which one it was, okay? But it wasn't, it took some time to do it. I had to have cover design. I had to do all of this. And even though I was told, well, you're the keynote speaker and there'll be at least 200 people, guess how many people actually showed up? 16.
Was it in person? No, it's virtual, right?
It was virtual. And out of that, I did actually get a client. So initially you would say, that's great. So that was worth all of that. but I was too low in the system. And so even though I met the CEO early on, I only ever met the CEO once. They wouldn't let me meet the board. They were very protective of the board. They wanted to do all the stuff themselves. They did an okay job because I was sort of behind the scenes helping them, but it really wasn't the kind of engagement that it really should have been. And I really learned a lot from that. And I invested a lot of time and effort, but I learned that that's just too low in the system. When you meet the general counsel, for me, if I'm meeting them and they're my point of entry, and that happens sometimes, okay, they're always a little bit intimidated about the board. They're almost afraid to introduce you to the board. Yeah. It's always nicer to meet the general counsel when the chair's already decided to hire you and they're just writing up the contract.
Yeah, absolutely. That is great advice. Now, what final parting words do you have around marketing for our viewers and listeners?
Well, I think one thing that I struggled with early on when I went on my own is that I had an awful lot of people coming to me and wanting to be I think they use the term strategic partner. And all they wanted to do was learn my methodologies about how to work with boards. They thought that working with boards was a growth area. It was sort of a sexy business, and they really had very little background in it at all. They'd maybe served on one board or two. I mean, I've worked with 200 boards now over the last 25 years. So that I think is something you can spend an awful lot of time trying to decide, am I going to joint venture with someone? Am I going to bring this person as a strategic partner? And I think my advice would be, make sure they're bringing enough to the party for you in terms of what you would be bringing to them if you're going to form that kind of alliance.
Yeah, I love that. In fact, I'm all for teaching someone to go fish themselves instead of hiring someone to help you, give you the fish. So I'm against partnerships in a lot of ways, but yeah, you have to be the primary source and you have to know how to go out and get the clients. And you have to have the funnels and build the funnels to get the clients. So you don't really need anyone else because you don't want to share.
Yeah, all these people really wanted to do was learn how to do what I did and eat off my leads. I mean, that's really all they wanted. And, one of the things I found when I went on my own, I had been a partner at 2 different large global consulting firms. And the work with the board was really new. I mean, when I went into it 25 years ago, there was almost no one doing this. There was maybe a couple of people. I mean, it's grown. There's an awful lot more people, dabbling or actually practicing in this space. And the people, very senior people at these firms, thought it was very sexy to go work with the board because the highest they usually ever got was to the CEO. And most of the time they were consulting to somebody else in the C-suite. They wanted to load in on my project. So like when I was at one firm, I wasn't allowed to just be the only consultant. I had to bring someone. And they were billing full freight, even though they didn't know anything. It was a learning experience for them. And I said, I have no problem with that. They were high billers in the firm and they were billing like they're 700, 800 an hour. And the client was absorbing that. And I never thought that was right or fair. Like if you want to come to half rate and learn, like that's okay. You want to come in and bill nothing and learn, that's great too. But I just thought it was unfair. And a lot of times when I went on my own, other people wanted to just do the same thing. They wanted to, bill all this time on my leads.
That's fascinating. I love this bird's eye view. That's why I love these podcasts. You find out all the naked truth. So how can people reach you, Beverly?
Sure. The best way to reach me is through my website, which is www.boardadvisor.net. So it's boardadvisor.net. One thing, just to be really clear, I am not a headhunter and I do not place people on boards. So please don't send me your board CV. While you laugh, Chala, it happens nearly every time I do a speaking gig. And they'll send me, I invite you to look at my CV. Well, you know what? I don't place people on boards. And honestly, I've worked with nearly 200 boards now over 25 years. There's been maybe 2 occasions where I actually recommended somebody to the board that ended up getting on. So I'm not a good source to find you a board if getting on a board is what you're looking for.
Thank you so much for being a guest, Beverly.
It's my pleasure. It's nice talking to you, Chala.